Hi, welcome to Yoga Selection. My name is Rod. Today's class, it's a restorative class. We'll be working with chest opening poses. We'll be incorporating chairs into a number of the restorative setups. So make sure that you've got access to a yoga chair. In one of the variations that we'll work with, I'll use 2 chairs, and it doesn't matter if you don't have the second yoga chair, you will be able to improvise with just an ordinary chair. In terms of other equipment that you'll need, we'll be using 2 bolsters, have at least 3 blankets, and have 2 blocks and a belt. We're going to begin in a variation of Supta Baddha Konasana. So we'll take our bolster. Often we would lie back in this pose with the bolster this way. Today we'll rotate it 90 degrees. I'm going to be positioning that bolster directly under the diaphragm region. We'll need some support for the head, and we'll use 3-fold blankets, and let's have at least 2 3-fold blankets. You may need the 3rd one to give your neck and head a little more support and lift. We're leaving a gap between the stack of 3-fold blankets and the bolster. This gap here, I can fit my hand through it. It's a little bit, maybe almost the width of a yoga block, just enough for the shoulders to fall down into. When we lie back in them, and we'll have our arms directly out to the side rather than in towards the sides of the body. You can use the belt as we would normally use the belt. So starting with a large loop, adjusting the buckle to get that large loop, bringing the loop of the belt over the head, over the shoulders, right down towards the tailbone, and then looping the belt around the feet and firming the buckle. And then we're lying back so that the diaphragm is positioned directly over the bolster, and placing our head back onto the blankets. As I mentioned there, the arms are out to the sides. And I'll give you a moment just to determine if you need a extra support for your head. So the neck should be comfortable. The emphasis of the pose comes to the chest lift, in particular that diaphragm region of the body. We're not so concerned here with elevating the head higher than the shoulders. Make sure that as you start to now settle into the pose, your knees are able to release in a downward direction. So very common here, particularly if there's some tightness around the adductors and the hips, for there to ongoing be a little bit of a lift with the knees towards the ceiling. Just allow the knees to passively drop down towards the floor. So a variation of Supta Baddha Konasana that is really good for bringing our awareness to the breath. So let's already direct our attention there, so that we consciously relax the knees and are aware of the knees relaxing whilst we're inhaling. Just the next couple of cycles of breath. Whilst you're breathing in, consciously let the knees relax down during that in-breath. You want to grow that release throughout the whole body. Shoulders, elbows, wrists releasing down. Feel those regions of the arm whilst breathing in. As you inhale, shoulders, elbows, wrists release down. Notice the change in rhythm that starts to come as the body settles, adjusts to being in this position. Always that strong correlation between the eyes and the breath in yoga poses, particularly these more passive ones. Make sure that your eyes releasing, descending during the inhalation. observing the breath and noticing the lift there in the lower part of the chest, that region where the diaphragm is situated. And we can feel it from the inside, we can see it from the outside. There's an opening, an expansion of that region of the chest. It isn't, however, pushing the diaphragm up. Even though the chest lifts and has more space, the diaphragm, it sits back more into the body with that space. The space is there actually more in a sideways direction for the diaphragm, so that as we breathe in, we can feel the diaphragm broadening outwards. The bolster really helps with that. It helps to guide the breath in that outward direction. Eventually the chest lifts up, but the bolster really helps the side ribs to spread at the beginning of each inhalation. It's a really good pose for freeing up the diaphragm, removing any tension, any compression from that area of the body. Gives a reasonable lift to the upper chest, but an area of the body that we also want to focus on when we're working more with breath awareness. So let's start to transition now. We'll come up and out of this pose. Removing the belt. We'll stay with a Baddha Konasana variation. Upashraya. We'll need a chair now. Let's use the yoga chair. We'll place the yoga chair so that the back of it is leaning into the wall. We'll be using our bolster and we'll be balancing the bolster, ideally vertically. We can just leave a little bit of a leaning angle with the bolster leaning towards the chair, but more or less vertical. We'll use a threefold blanket here where we'll be sitting. The blocks, now they can be good supports for knees if you've got tighter hips. They can also be nice support for the hands if your hands don't easily reach to the floor. You can also use them for both of those purposes simultaneously. So let's have the blocks there ready to go to the sides. And now an important prop to have, and at least to have within reach because you may or may not need it, is a rolled blanket. And I'm rolling from the broad fold towards the other broad fold. And we'll use this for supporting the neck, and the thickness of this roll will vary according to your neck. Now for me, sometimes I can be in this pose and just the top of the bolster is a really nice support for the back of my skull. The head does hang back in this pose and it's quite comfortable for my neck, but make sure that might not be the case for you. You may need a rolled blanket that you can reach when you're sitting in the pose, and then you can just slide that into position to make sure that the neck is comfortable. So Baddha Konasana. We won't use the belt. You could use the belt, but for today we'll just have the legs free. Bring the soles of the feet together, the knees out to the side. And good that we've got the chair positioned up against the wall, because initially we can lean back quite firmly onto the chair, and you can see as I do that I'm getting a nice opening in the upper part of the chest. So in previous pose we were working more with the diaphragm area, now we're working more with that band of ribs just under the collarbone region of the upper chest. Now let's determine if we need the neck support or not. So head comes back, and so I can feel there that the back of the skull is reasonably comfortably supported by the top of the bolster. Now look, it's not just for the sake of the neck, It's also for the benefit of the breathing sensation around the throat. So I can feel there as I breathe and as I talk and breathe, the Adam's apple region feels a little pushed up into the skin of the throat. Ideally there'd be more of a softness there. So just to achieve that, I will use that blanket. I probably won't need the full roll, probably just half of the potential roll. So I've rolled the blanket there halfway, placing that into the back of my neck. And then as I bring my head back, you can probably even hear from my voice, it's a more comfortable head position. The throat feels more comfortable. Now the blocks, as I mentioned, it can be either a support for your knees or a support for your hands, particularly for those of you a bit like me whose spine tends to be a bit long relative to arms. I find without the blocks there, my knuckles don't so easily reach to the floor. They're a bit light in their contact. With the blocks there, I feel that my arms are more settled. The other thing that you can do though is just bring those blocks in either side of the outer thighs, and that way they can both support the hands and support the knees and just allow them to more fully, completely relax, so that there's very minimal effort in the pose. More or less just completely releasing and relaxing back into the support here. Make sure that your knees have completely relaxed. Make sure that your hands have completely relaxed. And be particularly aware of that whilst breathing in. So next couple of cycles of breath, you breathe in, your chest inflates, but the hands, the knees releasing down during the in-breath. During that in-breath, your chest inflates. The backs of the arms, they stay soft, they release downwards, dropping sensation with gravity towards the floor. Feel that. Compare that. The passive release on the skin at the back of the arm, that area from the back of the shoulder to the elbow, the skin, the muscle fibre there, dropping with gravity. The side ribs and chest lifting each inhalation. In comparison to the previous pose, this one really effective at opening the upper part of the chest, and not so important the appearance, looking at someone in the pose from the outside. And to a degree we can determine and adjust the pose from that, but really important how that feels from the inside. And that opening to the upper part of the chest, the good reality check for whether or not you're getting it is if the breath movement is naturally gravitating towards that area when you let go, release and relax. So, nice supported, buoyant quality to the chest, the arms sinking with gravity, releasing downwards towards the floor. Okay, let's start to transition now, and we'll come up, we'll take our second chair and our additional bolster. So we'll grab that chair and bolster, and we'll come back to the mat. And we'll be setting up a supported Purvottanasana. And then we have got quite a bit of equipment that we're managing here, so work as best you can just to have a clear mat space. I find in this pose, over time I get a feel for how far I need to be away from the wall, and something that has helped me over time, if I just set the initial chair a little bit less than a bolster's length away from the wall. That works for me. You'll be able to potentially just measure that yourself, and for the next time it will mean a little bit less to and fro of coming up and down. Very commonly in this pose, the chairs don't go on the yoga mats, so that's probably the more common way of approaching this pose. Yoga mats are often then put on the two chairs as the chairs are together, and something that I've found, particularly with groups of people and all the different heights of people, if we do that, if we do place the yoga mat on top of both chairs, and it can be a good thing to do, but then it's very difficult to adjust the spacing between the chairs if we need to. And often for taller people, you will need to leave a bit of a gap between the chairs. It's commonly taught, this pose, with the chairs right together, which works really well for people with a short torso. But then for taller people, their head tends to get jammed up into this bar. There's no room for their arms to come over if they're wishing to do that. So you might just need to have a little bit of a gap there between the chairs. That will be customized from person to person. The first bolster that we use, it comes level to the seat of the chair. So if you've only got the one yoga chair, this is the one that you're using, this one here. The second chair, you're improvising a little bit, that will be the one that will be supporting your head. So first bolster level to the edge of the chair, knowing that the bolsters will overlap and our head's going to be placed up around this way. We don't want the bolster to be collapsing. So just to give it a little bit of extra support, we'll use one of the yoga blocks and we'll place it there at the end of the bolster. And then second bolster comes on top. We've left that overlap, and here's where we will eventually be sitting. So that the buttocks will be here, the lower back here, the head here. The head will need a support. We've already got the three-fold blanket there. That will be a minimum of height. Potentially you might need 2 of the three-fold blankets. Make sure that you're elevating the head higher than the shoulders here. Neck should be completely comfortable. And we'll just straighten up some of the other equipment that we've got around, knowing that there's a bit of extra things floating around at the moment. To get into the pose, we're initially straddling the top bolster. We stay sitting on that top bolster as we bring one leg at a time through the frame of the yoga chair. Once the legs are through, we can slide forwards, sitting the buttocks down onto the bottom bolster. Good if we lie back with the knees bent. So lying back, getting the head onto the support. Hands can initially just hold the back frame of the chair, and then we can determine if we've judged the distance correctly, and just, as I mentioned before, having that distance of just a little bit less than a bolster for me works well. If you're taller than me, it'll need to be further out, shorter, you'll need to come closer in. And it might be that you need to even just pause the video at this point and find just the right distance. And now that we're comfortably in the pose, well adjusted in the pose, so several ways, 3 main ways that we can work with the arms here. So we can either just lightly hold the back frame of the chair, probably the less restful way of being in the pose. We could grip the hands onto the elbows, folding the arms, and then bringing the arms back over the head and resting them there on the same blanket that the head is resting on. The method that we'll be working with today, and one that is very complementary to the pose we've just been, we're literally just going to be letting the arms hang freely down by the sides. Look to the screen if you're not sure. Just letting the arms relax and hang in the direction of the floor. Now, important that the lower back is comfortable. Often if there's some discomfort in the lower back, it means that you lay back too far and you need to increase the height of your bolsters. Now it might be also that you're working with bolsters that are a little old and have become a bit flat, and if that is the case, you just need to boost the height of the bolsters with lengthways half-fold blankets. It's a sort of pose that ideally you could just be in and fall asleep. Very comfortable. There should be no sense whatsoever of discomfort in the lower back. If the support is too low, sometimes that can be the case. Good if you've got the balls of the feet to the wall with the knees straight, and sometimes shorter stature people will sometimes need a support there under the heels. And the room where I'm practicing, it's quite a warm day. Sometimes it might be that you're practicing in a less warm room, and in that case you don't want your feet to get cold. If the mat's not there, you can always put a blanket underneath the heels just so that there's no risk of the feet getting cold. So often if there is some discomfort in the lower back, it makes the abdominal region tense. Make sure that you bring your attention to the abdominal area. It should be completely possible to relax there, letting the diaphragm descend. Feel it with the exhalation. As you exhale, navel descending. Look for tension anywhere around the navel. It might be in that zone between the navel and the pubic bone. Might be in the zone between the navel and the diaphragm. Might be to the right or the left side. Nice, smooth, even release of the navel down. The arms in a similar way, releasing down. Feel it naturally with the exhalation, but also with the inhalation. The wrists, the elbows, the shoulders gravitating down as you inhale. The arms releasing down as you breathe in, the side ribs spread out. The arms releasing down as you inhale, the chest, it spreads but then lifts. The lift in the chest, not dragging the arms. Arms stay releasing down as the breath moves in. Okay, and now to transition out of the pose, let's remain laying back, but we'll just bend the knees and bring the feet flat to the floor. And then sit upright and just pause there for a moment. Now, the easiest way to completely exit the setup is to then slide back again so that you're sitting on the top bolster, and then the knees can quite easily come out of the frame. We'll keep one of the chairs, both of the bolsters, and we'll put the other chair out of the way. We'll be setting up now for a variation of Viparita Dandasana. Now, again, I'm going to, for today, keep the yoga chair on the mat. Commonly, we're not doing that. Home practice, we can often do that knowing that it gives the chair a little bit more security, and often we need that better grip for the props, the hands, the feet. Will be, for me, something that helps setting up with the chair so that when I, as I'm doing now, sit against the wall, I take note of a leg's length, and roughly my heel coming to the center here, the middle of the seat of the chair, will often be a good starting point, but I probably will have to either move a little forward or a little back, but that will just save a bit of time measuring that way. We'll need a bolster here. The head will rest onto it. That's going to be quite low down for many people. I think as a good starting point, we can work with a lengthways half-fold blanket on the bolster. Depends, of course, a little bit on how thick your blankets are, how thick your bolsters are. That will be a good starting point. More than likely, you may need to build that support up. So you've got a few blankets there. You might need at least that second one for the head support. And this edge of the chair, it can potentially dig into the upper back. It's not compulsory, but just to give that a little more softness, particularly as we're working not so much in a back bend sequence, but a restorative sequence, just to give a little more softness there to the upper back. We'll put that blanket there. So our feet will be to the wall. Our shoulder blades just off the edge of the chair here, the top of our head onto the bottom bolster. Just looking at that, it does look a little far away from the wall, so I'll be interested to see how this does set up. I may need to come a little closer. So I'm bringing my hips through. Maybe just good to watch me come into it first, and then you can come into yours. At this point, my shoulder blades have just come off the edge of the chair. If I go a little bit further over, my head can touch the support. And then if I reach for the wall, and actually it's about right, I'll have my feet together. You can also work with the feet apart. Feet apart keeps the abdominal region a little softer. And the arms, they can either stay here, holding the frame of the chair, or we can loosely fold the arms at the elbows and let the arms come over and be supported by the bolster. So I'm going to remain here and give you a moment just to set yourself up. Again, it might be a pose where you need to briefly pause the video and just find just the right distance that you need to be away from the wall. You can see, just for me, just having that prior knowledge of from previous times doing the pose and just noting the distance that I need to be away from the wall, it just fast tracks the practice, and there's less forward and back and up and down. It's not that we get too fixated on measurement. It's of course how the pose feels, how it relates to the breath, and we're always optimizing that. Firm contact with the feet to the wall. Now there is some pressure onto the top of the head here. It's not such a passive movement. For the comfort of the neck, it's important that the shoulders are lifting up, the shoulder blades are lifting up, and that region of the spine, that last bit of the spine before the neck, where the spine and the neck join, lifting up and into the body. Feel that during the inhalation, as you inhale, that area of the upper back lifting. It helps the chest to lift up. The exhalation, make sure that the navel can completely release. It releases in a downward direction. If the breath can relax to the point where there's that natural brief pause immediately after the exhalation. During that brief pause, the surrounding skin, the skin that surrounds the navel, there's that sense of the skin there dilating in all directions, expanding away from the navel in all directions. Notice the comprehensive opening that is coming to that band of ribs in the upper chest.
Each in-breath, feeling that region of the chest expanding upwards and outwards. Throat though remains relaxed, eyes remain relaxed whilst breathing in. And then to come out of the pose, let's bring our hands back to hold the frame of the chair. And we'll bend the knees, bringing the feet down to the floor. Now we could slide back, probably that would fit in more nicely with the restorative energy that we're working with here. But for me there's quite a natural movement to be able to sit back up, and then there's the benefit of just being able to sit in that neutral position for a moment as a recovery position. So I'm going to head there now, so leading up with the chest, sitting upright, just letting the breath settle. And then we'll come out of the chair. Now we're going to do a similar pose. Rather than Viparita Dandasana, we'll be heading now to a version of Sedabandha Sarvangasana. It will be a relatively high version of it. High meaning that the hips are going to be elevated in comparison to the head and the shoulders. So the head and shoulders will be level in this pose. Previous one, head was lower, below the line of the shoulders. I'm going to build up the height of the bottom bolster here. I'm going to add a second blanket. I would recommend, just as a starting point, that you do that as well, to ensure that now maybe actually before I do that, just the position of the chair, it's going to need to be a little bit closer to the wall. And again, just something that works for me and something that you'll be able to try and then optimize to your particular body. So this previous pose, heels came to the center of the chair, so I can see where the seat of the chair is. I'll take that blanket off. I'll slide it back now so that the heels come level to the edge of the chair. So I've moved the chair in closer to the wall. I'll return that blanket here just for a little bit of cushioning. The previous pose, the shoulder blades were just off the edge of the chair. In this particular pose, the sacrum is going to be positioned here near to the edge of the chair. This edge of the chair here, you should be able to very lightly feel it in the lumbar spine, more on the skin of the lumbar spine. It shouldn't be pushing hard into the bones there. As I mentioned, I'll just boost the height now here so that my head and shoulders can reach there. You can see that that support's a little bit higher than the floor. It might be comfortable for you just to have your hands directly down onto the floor. I'm going to use some blocks there. The blocks can support the wrists, and it just optimizes that comfortable position of the head. Again, this is more of a educated guess as to how far I need to be away from the wall, but the best way to see if we need to adjust is to come into the pose. So I'm coming this time further over, head and shoulders onto the support. My feet then come to the wall. It's good if, and it's worked out well, that my knees are slightly bent, because now I can let the skin there at the back of the neck catch on the blanket as I push my legs straight. Feet again can be either together or they can be hip width apart. It gives a more of a soft abdominal aspect to the pose if we work that way. I've positioned the blocks there under the wrists, palms are facing up. That just helps my arms to more completely relax. So I'm giving you a moment there just to settle into the pose. Find the correct distance there. So if the chair is digging up into the lumbar spine, it needs to be adjusted and move towards the wall. Even just a minor movement of the chair position can have a great overall effect on the quality of the pose. Again, the navel region during the exhalation, just let it release and settle. As the navel releases down, all of the surrounding skin spreads out, expands. That first part of the inhalation, when it eventually naturally returns, the navel's just for that starting point still dropping down. Eventually it lifts up, but the chest leads that inhalation movement, not the navel. Make sure that your shoulders are anchored down to the support. Imagine someone just with their hands gently pressing the shoulders down. Pay attention to that sensation each time you breathe in. Breathing in, the chest inflates, the shoulders though releasing down. Breathing in, shoulders releasing down, the side ribs spreading out. Finding those layers to the breath. The first layer, sideways expansion. And then the next layer, the lift in the chest. The lift in the chest, it doesn't come until you've first had that nice sideways spreading across the diaphragm, across the lower side ribs, even those ribs there nearer to where the armpits are. Each time the chest inflates, keep your eyes relaxed, keep the temple region of the skull relaxed. Alright, so in order to come out of the pose, there's two options. We can either, and I'm going to do it, sit back upright again, or it might feel that that's quite a lot of work and create hardness in the abdominal region, and we're actually trying to soften that area. So the other option is to just slide further back away from the wall and bring your hips down to the floor that way. So two options there. I'm going to now bend my knees and coming back up to that neutral upright position. You've either done that or preferably just sliding back, ensuring that the abdominal region maintains that space and softness. And then we'll transition now to a variation of Savasana, Niralamba Savasana. We won't need the chair, so we can put the chair away. Make sure that you've got both of your bolsters and blankets. And we'll set up like this. One of the bolsters surprisingly close to the wall. Now you might need to play around a little bit with this distance. Our head is actually going to be here. The top of the head needs to be as close as possible to the wall without actually touching the wall. Important that you've got good padding for the back of the skull. So most setups you will need to put a blanket down here, otherwise the back of your skull is going to be not enjoying that hard sensation of being pushed down into the floor. The height here, particularly if you've got flatter blankets, you may need to build it up. It's important in this pose that the region of your spine between the shoulder blades is able to move both in and lift up. Generally, for this version of Savangasana, you will need considerably more height under your shoulders than your just regular Savangasana. We'll add the same amount of height to this bolster, T-shaped bolster, as what we've got here. The blocks off to the side. And I'll describe it and then I can show it. So I'll be pressing my hands down and swinging over. Bent knees, bring the shins to the wall, tucking the knees down the wall. This will make sense when you see me do it. Something though that can be difficult for many people is that ability to swing over into halasana, particularly with the wall there. We don't get quite the same wind up to be able to swing the legs over. So it may be necessary, particularly if abdominal strength is not your greatest attribute, we may need to place some blocks for the hands, and that can actually give you much more of an enhanced ability to swing over. So blocks may be necessary. We're starting this way, we slide back, bringing the head down to the floor, and I've just managed that the back of my skull near the top there is touching the floor, but my forehead is maybe a centimetre, less than half an inch away from the wall. And then I'll swing up and over. And notice my hands. Straight away my hands come to the wall, and then I'm walking my shoulders one at a time back up and onto the support. So the knees are in towards the forehead. It's actually quite a nice release for the lower back. And keep the hands active for the time being as we then, one leg at a time, walk the feet up the wall. Eventually, we're just letting the hands rest down here more passively. The backs of the hands to the floor and the palms facing up. So I'll give you some time just to arrive in the pose. Important that the forehead is close to the wall, again without touching it, but close to the wall. Otherwise the feet tend to overhang too far. Ideally the pose more or less is vertical as it would be in our more regular Savangasana. The front of the body needs to lift here. So it's possible for the big toes to creep higher up the wall, but the front of the body to remain dropping towards the floor. Work more from underneath upwards, so lifting the chest, lifting the front of the pelvis, lifting the front of the thighs, and the consequence of that lift at the front of the body, the last thing that happens is that the toes are pushed higher up the wall. Buttocks in, front of the pelvis lifting. The body lifts from the base of the throat, but in contrast to that, the face descending towards the floor. Now, face is often a very broad instruction, particularly in Iyengar yoga. We don't often refer to the face as a whole. Make sure that you find the different components there. Check that the lips have relaxed, the tongue, the throat relaxed, descending. Of course, the eyes, the eyelids, the temple skin, the skin more broadly that covers the whole facial region. Just allow it to sit back onto the skull. The body itself, though, lifting up. Now, of all the poses that we've worked with so far in this sequence, this is probably the one that involves a little more muscular effort. Notice though the effect that the pose has on the breath It brings a nice, even, steady rhythm to the breath. A really discernible rhythm to the breath. And it's in part the pose itself that's doing that. It's in part the sequence of poses we've done prior to this pose and the building momentum of those different poses and the effect they have on the breath. But that really set, natural, even pattern to the breath, it tends to linger on the breath beyond the practice. Okay, let's start to transition out of the pose now. We'll bend the knees, slide them back down the wall towards the forehead, and then we'll slide the hips back. We can just roll to the side, and we'll then just push the bolsters to the wall, right to the wall, and then we can just lie back a few moments this way, head and shoulders to the floor. Just a nice transition movement there, particularly for those of you that were having difficulty in getting that opening and lift in the upper back. Now it just returns that opening to the body, but we're just noticing the rhythm of the breath, the natural rhythm of the breath. Still feel it here, very present in the body. Smooth and even inhalation, exhalation. We want to bring that natural rhythm into our last pose now, Shavasana. So knees bend, roll to the side, and we'll use one of the bolsters. The second bolster might work well across your thighs, or you can just put it completely out of the way. We'll take a 3-fold blanket as a head support and a half-fold blanket as a hip support. So as I mentioned, the bolster, even with that blanket on it, can be quite a nice relaxing weight to have across the tops of the thighs. I'm just going to put that off to the side. If you've got a bit of equipment around you, as I do, just make sure that you've got room for your arms to comfortably come out to the sides. And then sitting up onto that initial blanket and lying back. You've got a third blanket there. You may need to use it to keep yourself warm. You may need to use it to add some additional height for your head. So here, important that the head is elevated higher than the backs of the shoulders, and that the forehead and chin at least level, ideally the forehead a fraction higher than the chin here. A few moments just to be there and settle. The abdominal region, let it relax, let it release in a downward direction during the exhalation. We've looked at it in a number of the preceding poses. The surrounding skin around the navel has that sense of dilating, expanding, particularly at that point immediately after the exhalation, that brief transient pause there just before the next cycle of inhalation kicks back in. And if we really carefully observe that point, the first aspect of an inhalation is that descent of the navel. The navel descends, it drops, and then the breath starts to move in. So rather than the first sign of an inhalation being the rush of breath through the nostrils, observe it, the first sign of the inhalation is the navel just releasing a little in a downward direction. And the breath starts to move in, and the diaphragm region spreads outwards. breath moves in as we breathe in. That band of ribs under the collarbones, eventually it lifts up and spreads outwards. Movement of the breath, the movement of the chest, removed from what the arms are doing. The arms still with gravity dropping down to the floor. Notice that very clear, stable rhythm that has emerged from the breath. Feel it as the navel moves about with inhalation and exhalation. The movement of the diaphragm spreading out, returning back to its starting position. As the breath starts to soften and settle more, it gravitates increasingly towards the sinus region. Feel the rhythm of the breath there. Even as the breath gets more gentle, more subtle, still that very clear, even sense of rhythm in the breath. Eyes completely still. Okay, and then let's take a couple of slightly deeper in-breaths. And then bend your knees, bring your hands across your chest or abdomen. Eyes open. And then, as you're ready, roll to the side and come up. Thank you for practicing with Yoga Selection.